Yep, that's me, and you're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation. On June 1st, 2025, the Ukrainian Security Service performed an operation worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. For months, they prepared a covert operation smuggling drones, personnel, and resources into the Russian territory and building shipping containers secretly equipped with drones. And when the time was right, all hell broke loose, with Russian strategic aviation getting the biggest slap in its face in history, with one plane being on the receiving end in particular. Seemingly an old and relic of the past, the Tu-95. And despite what you might think, the Tu-95 is far from that. This bomber, born in the dark ages of the Cold War, has German roots, and it became probably the most photographed aircraft in history, posing for photos with the American 3rd, 4th, and even 5th generation fighters intercepting it throughout the decades. But why do the Russians still have it? What threat does it pose? And why were the Ukrainians so keen to destroy it? Well, let me tell you a little story about it. World War II concluded with a deafening detonation and then silence that reshaped global power. With the atom bombs falling on Japan, the United States emerged as the dominant nuclear force, possessing not only the bomb, but the long-range bombers to deliver it. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was left pretty vulnerable, not only lacking a bomb of its own, but also lacking any means for it to reach American soil. By 1949, things started to change, and Moscow had detonated its first atomic device, closing that nuclear gap in explosive terms. But delivering it across the globe, now that was still an issue. The Soviets had the Tu-4, a B-29 copy made from a US aircraft that made an emergency landing in the USSR during the War in Pacific. It was pretty good for posturing, but obsolete before it rolled off the line. Uncle Sam had already leaped ahead with jet power bombers like the B-47 and was deep into development of their next greatest weapon, the B-52. The Soviet Union's attempt to scale up the Tu-4 into the Tu-85 didn't exactly work out. The performance fell short, and the Kremlin recognized the need for a clean slate design. Competing design bureaus were giving the task to build a new strategic bomber. Messerschmitt decided to build a modern jet bomber, even though he knew that current jet technology would not give it the performance needed. But he did believe that better engines would arrive in the near future. However, his rival Tupolev opted for turboprop propulsion. It was less glamorous than jets, but better suited for extreme ranges and endurance. It was a gamble, but one that was backed by solid engineering logic. But for Tupolev, the real breakthrough came from the Germans. Using knowledge seized from Nazi Germany and the talents of relocated German engineers who were going on an extended holiday to Siberia, Soviet engineers were able to turn the theoretical German Jumo 022 into the most powerful turboprop ever flown, the Kuznetsov NK-12. And it's the most powerful turboprop engine still to this day. Its contra-rotating propellers produced a loud roar and performance figures that bordered on the unbelievable for a propeller-driven aircraft. The Tu-95 prototype took flight in 1952, initially with two TV2F engines. These engines were actually hybrids combined of two separate TV2 turboprops, having a single output and an overcomplicated gearbox, which of course led to a tragic crash. Alas, in 1953, a test pilot and several crew members were killed by this prototype, but the program continued undeterred. Switching to 4 NK-12s with individual gearboxes to streamline the design, the aircraft was still notoriously loud, but its combination of speed, range, and altitude was nothing short of revolutionary. And most importantly, it was now reliable. The Tu-95 officially entered service in 1956, and what followed was one of the most remarkable careers in military aviation history. Well, at least before it got slapped by a drone from the Ukrainian equivalent of Walmart, but I'm getting ahead of myself. In 1958, the Bear demonstrated its power with a 17,100 kilometer non-stop flight, an endurance feat that left Western observers in awe. But it wasn't only range that surprised them. The projected speed for this aircraft was around 600 kilometers per hour with a range of 12,000 kilometers, but the actual speed was just below supersonic, and it could cover enormous distances and loiter for hours. And the key to this performance upgrade was the aforementioned NK-12 engine. But what exactly was the catch and the secret behind it? Well, first of all, it was insanely powerful, with 40% more than engines on an Airbus A400M today. Second, the propeller was a work of art. Its contra-rotating propeller blades would cancel out torque and reduce the thrust lost after Mach 0.6 to 0.7, which is a well-known issue on turboprops. Then, it helps delay the onset of propeller blade shockwaves at high rotational speeds. And last but not least, the blades were actually designed in a way that their tips would actually rotate in supersonic speeds without the loss of efficiency. This is pretty much black magic. But the Tu-95 is no 5-star hotel. A common crew complaint is the cramped cockpit, uncomfortable seats, and the fact that they don't have ejection seats at all. So in case this aircraft was going down, the only way to survive is to jump through the front wheel bay. And 2 crew members manning the cannons for self-defense could jump out of their own dedicated door. Initially, the Tu-95 was a free-fall bomb delivery platform, but in the 1960s, it began to carry cruise missiles, with the Tu-95K variant being fitted with the behemoth missile called the Ka-20. This evolution reflected broader Soviet doctrine, standoff delivery from safe distances, using bombers more as a missile launching platform than any sort of diving into the fray. Comrade Khrushchev had a thing for missiles, and he saw them as the future of warfare, so ICBMs would be the tip of the spear and large bombers were useless. Unless, of course, they could carry missiles. During the Cold War, the Tu-95 was one of the key tools of strategic intimidation. Regular flights near NATO borders triggered endless intercepts by Western fighters. Its lumbering pace was deceptive. The Bear was fast for a turboprop, and its endurance allowed it to reach far-flung patrol zones and stay there. And because it was so loud, NATO pilots could hear the Tu-95 coming long before it would show up on radar. The Soviets stationed their prize bombers in elite units like the 106th Heavy Bomber Aviation Division near Kiev, often parading them during drills and high-alert nuclear readiness exercises. While the US ran constant airborne alerts under Operation Chrome Dome, the Soviets held their bombers on ground standby, preferring rapid surge over continuous patrols. Which is something I want you to remember for something that's about to happen. But if push came to shove, the Tu-95s could be readied and launched with nuclear payloads in one final mission. But it wasn't just a nuclear mission that this airframe proved to be useful for. It was really quite adaptable. Tu-95 RTs became one of the most famous aircraft in the world because it was often pictured with NATO fighters that intercepted them over seas and oceans. It was a dedicated reconnaissance and SIG-INT version for the Soviet Navy and used throughout the Cold War. The Tu-126 was a flying radar station, the USSR's first AWACS aircraft. Then you have the Tu-142, which added maritime patrol and submarine hunting to the enormous resume. And a bizarre experimental aircraft, the Tu-95 LAL, was to carry an onboard nuclear reactor to test the feasibility of atomic-powered flight. The idea being that this aircraft could essentially fly forever. Well, at least till the food ran out. But spoiler alert, it didn't work. It was even developed into a passenger airline called the Tu-114, a fine one, if I may add, because it actually ended up being one of the safest Soviet airliners ever built. But you wouldn't exactly want to fly on it because remember those noisy engines? But hey, do I hear you complaining, comrade? But with time came the necessary modernization program. The Tu-95MS of the 1980s introduced compatibility with the Ka-55 cruise missile, the long-range weapon that could be launched far from the battlefield. And while the MS-6 variant carried 6 missiles internally, the MS-16 added more externally on underwing pylons. These configurations gave the Bear a second life as a missile truck, one that didn't need to get close to the target to be deadly. By the 2010s, Russia initiated the MSM upgrade to keep the Bear flying into the 21st century. Out went the relic of the Cold War, the tailgun position, and in came the Meteor NM2 electronic warfare suite, modern digital cockpits, and the Novella radar system. The Kar-101 and 102 cruise missiles joined the arsenal, giving the Bear precision strike capabilities with both conventional and nuclear payloads, and the new Kar-555 missiles replaced the older 55s. The Bear returned to the battlefield after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. From deep within Russian territory, the Tu-95 bombers unleashed waves of Kar-101 missiles at Ukrainian cities, energy infrastructures, logistical hubs, and military depots. Each strike involved carefully planned salvos, sometimes dozens of missiles per sortie. But this renewed relevance also made the Tu-95 now a high-value target. It was one of the main platforms that brought terror and fear to Ukrainian citizens. And the Ukrainian military didn't sit idly by. After months of planning, Ukraine's Security Service, SBU, executed Operation Spiderweb, a bold campaign that involved launching fiber-optic controlled drones inside the Russian territory. According to the Ukrainians, 117 of these drones, piloted by operators inside of Ukraine, after being launched from modified shipping containers to look like portable housing, struck Belia Air Base in Irkutsk Oblast and Olenia Air Base in Murmansk Oblast, both home to strategic bombers involved in the bombing campaign. 2 more bases were hit, with an attack on one of the bases failing when the truck carrying the drones caught on fire and exploded. But then, Ukrainian SBU released a 5-minute compilation video of the strikes on several more aircraft apart from those first thought to be destroyed. Some of the aircraft shown, like the A-50 AWACS, were retired, judging by the condition and lack of the engines on one of them, and some of the Tu-22Ms as well. But this new footage revealed an interesting piece of the puzzle. Some of the Tu-95s that were hit actually had missiles mounted on the pylons, which means that they were ready to be sent on a mission. We can also see that some of the drones didn't explode, or they only did limited damage, but that's exactly why the Ukrainians double or even triple tapped some of the aircraft to make sure they were destroyed. New high-resolution satellite photos confirmed that Tu-95s have been completely burned down and are beyond repair. But the biggest blow would be psychological. Russia's long-range air power had looked untouchable, comfortably nestled thousands of kilometers from the front line, only flying up into the sky to shoot off some cruise missiles. But Ukraine had proved that even strategic bombers could be reached, and more importantly, challenged the myth of absolute sanctuary. We still don't have definite numbers of how many bombers of each type were destroyed, but satellite photos and info will surface in time. Despite this strike taking out 15% of the currently active Tu-95 fleet, the Bear remains operational, a bit seriously beaten. Because the thing is, these aircraft can't be rebuilt or ordered again. And when they're gone, they are gone for good. Russia could theoretically build new Tu-160s, but that process is very slow and it will take years for Russia bomber aviation to recuperate from this loss. There is talk of retiring the Tu-95 by the 2040s, perhaps replaced by the upcoming Pakta stealth bomber, which you can watch here on the channel, but for now things are looking pretty gloomy. But this strike has shown infrastructural, organizational, and intelligence weaknesses of the Russian army. The Tu-95 was just a victim of the incompetence of the Russian side and the ingenuity of the Ukrainians. Now, on the other hand, there are voices saying that Ukraine just opened Pandora's box with this strike because under the old START treaty, nuclear-capable bombers are intentionally left in the open in designated air bases so the other side can verify the number of planes on satellites. However, the new START treaty does not explicitly state this, and the bombers can be hidden in hangars. Regardless of all this, let me remind you that Russia actually suspended its participation in the treaty in 2023 and is now just partially complying with some of the points. Ukraine and Russia are in a war, and Ukraine has every right to defend itself. Striking the bombers that strike them every day is fair game. The Tu-95 remains a contradiction on wings. It is thunderously loud, but still tactically relevant. It's a vintage in design, but modern in its armament. It shouldn't still be here, but it is, roaring across the skies with propellers spinning faster than logic would seem to allow.